One of the things I've learned over the years as I've had discussions with hundreds of war veterans is that people are different and they will have similar experiences, or sometimes they'll experience the same thing, but they'll come away with different memories and they will have different interpretations of what happened. I'm thinking, for example, of one combat veteran I spoke with who had an out of body experience during a battle. There was an explosion very close to him, an artillery shell or mortar shell went off very close to him. And he says when that happened, his spirit left his body, and then from some elevated place, his spirit looked down on his body and could see his body there on the ground, and then could also see what was happening in the battle around him. And then after a short period, his spirit went back into his body. So he had this out of body experience. And you would think that a person who had that kind of experience then would be open to spiritual or religious things, but he was not at all. He actually was an adamant atheist. When he arrived in Vietnam, he had the religious beliefs of his upbringing. When he left Vietnam, he was an adamant atheist. What he experienced in war drove him to atheism. Very differently, I spoke with a veteran who also experienced combat. And the experience of combat drove him to ask certain questions, which then led to a powerful religious conversion experience, which then led to him, after the war, training to be a minister. And then that was his career for several decades as a church minister. And so these are radically different outcomes that combat veterans from the conflict in Vietnam that they experienced. Other differences I've seen, just another that comes to mind, is that there are veterans who feel, as they look back on the Vietnam conflict, that the cause was just. Whether that cause is the struggle against communism, whether that cause is helping the people of South Vietnam to stand on their own and to be an independent nation, whether that cause is a combination of those two things, they look back on that war and say that the cause was good, the cause was just. Others will look back on the war and say, no, the war was fundamentally misguided. American policymakers didn't really understand Vietnam. They didn't really know what was going on. They didn't understand the history. They didn't understand the culture. The project was doomed from the outset. And so veterans who, served side by side in South Vietnam 50 years later, more than 50 years later, will look back and have very, very different interpretations of what that war was all about and what happened. There is one area where I've seen uniformity, and it's really related to a scenario that sometimes I give to veterans, and I especially will sort of offer this scenario to veterans who experience very, very difficult things in war, and they have those memories of war that dog them, that hang on them like the leeches of the jungles of Vietnam, and just kind of are continually draining them, showing up in their memories, showing up in their nightmares. These very difficult memories. And I ask the veterans, I give them this scenario. I say, if I could give you a little potion that you just take a sip of it and all of your bad memories of your time in Vietnam would go away, would you drink the potion? And I've asked this I've asked this question to by now at least a few dozen veterans, and of those, only two have said that they would drink the potion, that they would want to get rid of all of those memories. All of the other veterans said no. And the great majority of them said no really without any hesitation. They immediately said no. They would hang on to those memories. And that's a curious thing. To someone who hasn't experienced combat, it's impossible to understand. But these memories are terrible. These memories dog them. These memories are with them. I spoke with a veteran not long ago who said that he hasn't had a good night's sleep in years because of these memories of war. But they say at the same time, the large majority, that they would not want to lose those memories. We understand that combat veterans are not going to want to share everything. Some things are unshareable. And it's probably true that there's some things where it's almost a kind of desecration to put it into words, to share it with somebody who can't understand because that person has never experienced the world of war, let alone fierce combat. And so we understand that combat veterans won't want to share everything, or some combat veterans won't want to share everything. But if those memories are so important that the veteran will want to keep them for all of their difficulty, will still want to keep them, then that means that those memories are important. And some of them can be shared. They can be shared with someone who is interested, with someone who cares, with someone who really wants to hear.